have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the new updates to the newest piece of software, or the newest DxO PhotoLab software, PhotoLab 4. So this is what we're talking about today. And I changed the order a little bit. So we're not going to talk about the DxO Smart Workspace first. We're going to get into that as we sort of dive and do a deep dive into some of these new tools and features. But this is the stuff. Smart workspaces, so being able to customize and personalize your workspace, as well as cool new ways of navigating the workspace. The new Advanced History browser, batch renaming, and then image synchronization. And there's two cool things. I'm sure there's more than that. There's two cool things that I've been really focusing on with the image synchronization within PhotoLab 4. We're going to start with the photo library here in DxO PhotoLab 4. Now, we're talking about workflow. I'm sure everybody has different kinds of workflows depending upon what you're doing. Everybody does different kinds of photography. I teach at RIT. I shoot commercial work from time to time, not so much as I'd like to at this point with the current state of everything. And then I've also started documenting things around my house, as I just purchased a house. And so now I'm kind of using my workflow three different ways. But one thing that doesn't change with my workflow is the naming conventions and the folder structure. And I know it has nothing to do with PhotoLab, but it immensely helps workflows. If you have a good system of what's called a folder hierarchy, if you're not already familiar with that, throw that into a YouTube search, look up folder hierarchy, maybe folder hierarchy for photographers, and then naming conventions for folders. And I say that because that's one of the driving forces of my own workflow. And by keeping these things organized, it makes my PhotoLab workflow so much easier. So in DxO's photo library, there's it's a browser-based software, which basically means I'm looking at whatever hard drives I have plugged into my computer right now. And then there's this handy favorites section as well, which I tend to use quite a bit. And the other thing that we're going to talk about today are projects and using projects within PhotoLab. It's another way of organizing your images. It's an easy way of separating photographs from folders without physically moving the file. But anyways, long story short, we're starting within the photo library. I'm going to check my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything here. But we can talk about all these great new updates within the software. So yeah, naming convention. First thing that I like to do is I use the reverse date for my organization. That is, it's 2020, so I use 20, and then I have my month, and then I have my day, right? So here, this was shot on October 18th, and so it says 20, 10, 18, and then there's a folder naming that also just informs me as to what it was. So I was cleaning doorknobs because the person that owned the house before me painted over the doorknobs, and they're these beautiful old brass doorknobs, and I wanted to clean them off, so I photographed it for documentation. As I click on that folder, this next thing comes up, and I know for a lot of folks in this webinar, this is nothing new, but maybe for folks who are not totally familiar with what PhotoLab does, one of the sort of most important aspects of the software is that DxO has an entire lab that looks at and creates profiles for camera bodies and lenses, right? And so in this case, I'm shooting with an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, and I'm using a particular lens, and I'm shooting JPEG and RAW. So what this thing is asking me to do is download the DxO Optics module. And I'm going to do that right now as we're talking. It's very fast. They're just small files. And what that does is it creates, or it allows me to use the lens camera profile to get the most optimized version of my image. These first photos here, I actually need to rename at some point. Maybe we can do that during this webinar because that's something we're going to be talking about. There's water damage on the ceiling here, so I've taken pictures of it. It also has an interesting sort of pattern to it, so of course I'm going to shoot that. I'm going to decrease the size of my thumbnails here, and I'm just going to scroll through here because this is, I'm using this sort of folder to document a project that I'm working on. And just so that you can see the difference sort of the before and after, you know, this is what one of the doorknobs look like, and then this is what they look like afterwards, not the doorknob, but the panel itself. It's really, they're quite beautiful. Well, photographically, I'm running into some problems here. My white balance is actually not right, and I want to clean that up. And then also, right in the smack middle of my sort of documentation, I went over to a friend's studio. I'm actually going to switch back over to the photo library, so we're going to see this in thumbnails. I went into a friend's studio and I shot some images to sort of document that because I want to rent his studio at some point. Well, it doesn't make too much sense that they're in this folder. So at some point I'm going to move them. But the first thing that I want to do here is just rename this group of images so that I can find them more easily when I want to, you know, put my brief together for my next job where I'm using this particular studio. So I've got all of these images, and I want to be able to rename them. And DxO has made this very easy in this new version of the software. Actually, you know, gave us the capability of doing that. So what I'm going to do is highlight all of them. I've clicked on this first image. You can see it's a slightly different tone than the rest. And I'm going to hold the Shift key down on my Mac, which I think it's the same on a PC as well. Hold Shift, and then click on the opposite end, right? So all of these images that I want to rename, because they stick out in this folder, I can do that very easily. Highlight them, and then you just right-click on the image, and we go to rename selected images. And this is one of this new workflow capabilities here. And it's not the most gorgeous of workflow changes, even in the software right now, but it's a fantastic tool, and it's a very easy way of renaming group images like this. And so, you know, we've got these cool new features that I'm going to show you in regards to the interface looking more flashy and so on. And this doesn't look as cool, but it's a really handy tool. Rename selected images, right? So as I click on it, all of the images that I have highlighted are going to be renamed, right? And you can see that, rename these 13 images. There are a few options that we have here, so we can just blatantly replace a text, which we'll actually do later. I have another group of images that we need to change the name of. We can add text, which is what we're going to do here, and then we can altogether rename the files and add counters. Now, for my own workflow, I like to keep the original file extension number. So in this case, I'm going to just add text. And what I mean by that is all of these files sit in a folder, right? I think I'm going to move them afterwards, but they sit in a folder, and then they were shot on a particular day, and they have a particular naming convention. And just for my own sense of organization, I'll actually leave that PA180029.orf. But in this case, I'm going to add some text to the beginning. And in this case, I'm going to add Hill and Valley, because that's the name of the production company whose studio that is, and I want to be able to search that easily later on so that I can put my brief together and I can pitch it to my client. So all I'm doing is in the text document or section, I'm saying Hill and Valley and then underscore, and then you can see what the current file is and what it will be, right? So it'll still have that original extension. Now you can switch. So if you want the position of your new added text before or after, you can click on the drop-down menu and change that as well. In this case, I'll leave it before. I'm going to click rename, and then that is going to rename them here in PhotoLab, and then also in the folder itself, right? So it's actually renaming these files, just to, you know, be blatant and point that out specifically. But that's one of the great new features. Again, you know, it's not the coolest thing in the whole world like the next feature is that I'm going to show you, but it's a really handy feature, and it makes it very easy to be able to go in and group and rename and so on and so forth. All right, so the next tool that I'm going to show you within this folder is how you can actually easily adjust the image using corrections and tools within the customize section, and then basically copy and paste them. But I'm going to show you something even, in my mind, even better than that, right? So right now, I've clicked on this image, and all of these photos were shot in the same lighting condition. I had auto white balance on, and the camera just decided to do this. It's actually pretty close, but it's not correct. So what I want to do is I'm going to just stay on this one photograph of this of these knobs. I'm going to highlight all of them. So again, I'm clicked on this left image. I'm going to hold Shift and click on the far right. And from here, I'm going to go into my white balance adjustment. And I'm just going to use the color picker. And I'm going to choose one of the sort of neutral areas that's on the knob, because with this knob, I actually messed up and I rubbed off a lot of the patina. Anyways, check out what happens. As soon as I click on my white balance here, it will shift. That's actually a lot closer to the actual color. And then because I had all of these other images highlighted, that change is reflected in those other images, right? So you can see that they all changed as they were all highlighted. And this is a really wonderful, simple to use way to sort of match these things because I know I wanted all of them to have that same white balance. And it's as simple as that. When I'm done with my white balance tool, I'm just going to click the close button. And voila, now I have my white balance adjusted on all of the images. But the photos, I think, need to index as well. You saw when I clicked on this image, it was still the same tone and color. The photo had to re-index because of the fact that we updated those adjustments. That's actually much closer to the color that those ended up being. Also shows you how much I know about cleaning off the paint of these things, because I definitely didn't get them back to their original beauty, but they're pretty close and they're much nicer than they were. And it was a good first experiment. All right, moving on. We're going to move away from this hard drive. I'm going to move into my favorites section. So I've jumped back into my photo library. And in this case, usually I'm doing these webinars about Nix software, and I actually get to talk about workflow within PhotoLab. So in this case, I'm going to be using a folder that's in my internal hard drive on the computer, and it's the one that I specifically make for my Nix software work. And in this case, we're talking about DxO, not Nix software, but I sort of put these all in the same folder. And so what we're going to do is jump into this grouping of images. I'm going to just check my notes to make sure we're good to go. And we're going to move into workspaces. So some of the new tools within sort of the new updates, I shouldn't call them tools, some of the new updates to the interface are within the custom section. So let's go right into the customize section. And I want to talk first about workspaces and then palettes, because there's a bunch of updates that have been done to the workspace, but it's a good thing to know about, you know, what the palettes are, how to develop your own palettes if you want to, and then also what the heck workspaces even are. So if you follow my cursor up into the top, I'm going to click on the workspaces drop-down menu. And the software's sort of standard operation in terms of the tools palette on the right side is called the DxO Standard Workspace. So as I click on this, this will look really familiar to anybody who's already opened up the software. You're going to have sort of a palette on the left that's going to start out with a histogram and a zoom move and a metadata, and then some other stuff down below, the new Advanced History browser. Oops, as I zoom in. And then you're going to have the sort of standard tools that are built in. So the basic tools, DxO Viewpoint and FilmPack, these are the two plugins that I've got installed into my PhotoLab as well. But anyways, if you were using just the DxO standard and you didn't have those other plugins, it would look like this, right? You'd have the basic tools. If I go into Workspace and we switch into DxO Advanced, now the left side looks almost exactly the same, but the right side has what's called I guess, Advanced Workspace. And what that means is it has all of the tools that are built into the software basically laid out in there, which is really great because you have access, but that's a lot of stuff to balance out, right? And to look through and to know and understand where it is and what it is. So it's handy if you're familiar with the software and you want to operate the software this way. But I would actually take it one step further in that you can create your own custom workspace, and then there's really cool navigational aspects to all of that as well. So what I've gone and done already, this is my workspace that I like to use. I call it Dan's Process. So I've gone into my workspace. I'm going to show you how to do this. I'm just going to right now show you what mine looks like. I'm going to go click on Dan's process. And in here, I have basically all of the tools as well, but I've created my own palette. So these groupings, this thing, basic, geometry, DxO, viewpoint, detail, light, color, and so on. I've created my own basic set of tools that I use on almost every single photograph that I run through DxO. And then I've also changed the order of the palettes to fit the kind of thought process that I use when working on these images. So, I'm not going to go into detail as to why I do these things this way. We totally could at some point, but in my basic section, I've got my color profile, right? Which in my mind is the first step in the interpolation of the raw file. It's the first thing that I do. I make sure that I've got the correct color rendering or the color rendering that I'm interested in using for the particular group of images. And then I go into white balance, and then I go into exposure and contrast adjustments, and then down into color adjustments from there. And then oftentimes move into localized adjustments. And then geometry and DxO viewpoint, these are ways of fixing any issues that might be occurring because of optical distortions or me shooting architectural photography but looking straight up at a building or something like that. I can fix those aspects right in here. This workflow, excuse me, makes sense to me. So let's kind of go on a journey and make one for you as well. And the first thing that we need to do is learn how to make a custom palette. So we're going to go into the palette section, which is up in the upper sort of tool palette drop down. And all of these tool palettes are on in my case, except I don't have essential tools on because I've kind of created my own essential tools in that basic module or basic palette. Anyways, I'm gonna just jump into a different image. Now that I think of it, I'm gonna pivot here. I'm gonna go into my project and we're gonna click on this infrared image because this is the kind of photography where I might set up a custom palette, after creating my own workflow. So here I have an infrared sort of architectural snapshot image of a building in Chicago, and it's an infrared photograph. I want to be able to adjust this. There are certain tools that I would probably use to do that, right? And those are different than a visible image, visible spectrum image, or visible light spectrum image. So I'm going to go into palettes, that drop-down menu in the upper portion of the interface, and I'm going to click on New Palette. From here, I have to name my new palette. So I'm just going to call it infrared. Infrared. Click OK. And then we get this new blank palette. Right? And the way that you adjust these palettes, whether it's docked on the right or left side of the interface, like these are, or it's floating like this one is you click on this little sort of hamburger or settings button in the upper right corner. And this is where you're going to be able to choose which specific tools are going to go into your palette, right? So in this case, I definitely need white balance. I probably would want my profiles as well, maybe presets. So let's just click a couple. So here's white balance. I'm going to click into that again, and I'm just going to sort of start at the bottom and work my way up. Tone curve, definitely tone curve for infrared. Histogram, not so interested. Let's see. Smart lighting is cool. These tools are really handy in any kind of photography, the denoising, the DxO clear view, and the smart lighting. Color rendering, yeah, definitely. But now, my palette is kind of out of order, right? Because at least in my thought process, I'd actually want my color rendering to be before my white balance probably. So anytime you have any of these tools in these palettes, you can actually click on the text of the palette or the tool itself, so color rendering, and then I can click and drag this. I should be able to click and drag it. There we go. Oh, sorry, I gave you the wrong instruction. Don't click on the text. Click in between the text and then this favorite star here, and you can go and drag that up into any order you want. So you can reorder your palettes. For the sake of time, let's just say that this is the infrared palette that I want. So I'm happy with it. I probably would add a couple other tools, but I'm going to go ahead and dock this on the right side. And for now, I'll just stick it underneath my watermark. And what I've got to do is just basically drag it down into the right side or the left side, whichever side you want to use. And it will basically populate once you place it in the right place. So now it's in the infrared section here. And apparently, yeah, there it is. And so that's how you create your own custom palette. Once you know how to create your own custom palette, you can adjust the ones that are already built in, and or you can, move these around, right? So I can change the order of these, or, and probably what would be smarter in this case, instead of having this sit within my Dan's process workspace, what I probably should do is actually just make a new workspace for infrared photography. Right, and so I think I would need to augment and change these tools as well. We don't have enough time to do that, unfortunately. But what we'll do is we'll just create a new saved workspace, and we'll name it infrared. So we'll go up to workspaces, we'll go to workspace or save workspace, and I'm just going to call this one infrared. There we go. Click save, and that's how you go about saving a custom workspace as well. Now, I know we're covering a lot, I hope it's not too fast, but I imagine most folks right now, as you're using the PhotoLab, you're probably using either DxO Standard or Advanced. So for the rest of the webinar, I'm gonna stick with the interface that's gonna look similar to what you're probably looking at for the most part. So I'm gonna go to DxO Advanced, and that's going to change the right side of the interface for us, and we can cover a lot of the other tools. But I think it's really important to get to know how those workspaces work and how palettes work so that you can customize this interface specifically for the kinds of photography that you do, right? In fact, it might be a good idea if I'm documenting my house. Maybe there's a group of tools that I'm using in PhotoLab every single time. I could make a workspace that just reflects those tools. So I don't have to worry about looking through every one of these really fantastic tools every time when I want to do these very basic things to most of those images that are just documenting what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to check my notes here. Yeah, cool. We've talked about those and that. And now we should talk about organization updates that are new in PhotoLab 4. So some of the really cool new capabilities is the ability to search for corrections and also to break these different tools palettes up into smaller groupings, right? And so if I click on this button here, the little sun, anything that falls within this tool palette is sort of categorized as light adjustment, right? Density or contrast kinds of adjustments. As I scroll over, these are the color manipulation tools. So white balance, color accentuation, color rendering, HSL, all of those things. Moving to the right, we click on detail. So here, you don't see much within my, my interface. I'll move this over here so you can kind of see what's going on. We're not going to get to talk too much about this brand new denoising technology. We're going to get back into sort of the workflow capabilities and updates. So right now we're looking at the detail tools. If I move to the right, we've got our geometry tools. So lens corrections and adjustments and crops, horizon adjustments and perspective. You've got your local adjustments, and then you've got your watermarks and effects, right? So if one thing that's happened to me since the update is I will sometimes leave a button on, and that will kind of confuse me or throw me off a little bit because I'm just getting used to it as well. So one thing that you do have to note is if you're not able to find the tool that you're looking for, or maybe you're like, well, where's my contrast tool? You forget that you've clicked on the color adjustment and you go and even search it. If this button is on, it's going to be really hard to find the tools that maybe you're looking for. So what you got to make sure to do is turn off the button if you're done with it. So you can see that it's highlighted in blue, or just remember to switch into the correct button. So if you don't like using them, no problem. You don't need to. You can just leave them off. But if you like organizing this way, it does make sense, I think, in terms of adjusting contrast and color and detail and geometry and so on. But another really cool feature is if you are looking for a specific tool, you can just search for the correction. So in this case, I'm gonna, let's say, I'm going to search lens. How about that? Because I know something's going to come up here. So I'll search lens. And then when I just type in lens, any tools that pertain to lenses are going to come up. So here's lens sharpness and here's distortion, right? If I delete that and I go back to my search quandary here and I go in and type in maybe contrast, if I spell it right, there's the contrast tool. If I type in color, I'm going to see any of the tools that pertain to color or that specifically say color in them. And so this is a really easy way of being able to search out particular tools that you might want to use. I find this really handy as well because sometimes it can be a little bit much to have to look through all of these tools to find one specific thing. And so it's really nice to have that kind of tool or that sort of search capability. One thing that you do want to note is if you have one of these buttons on, like let's say I click into effects and we're in the instant watermarking and we've got some other tools because of the fact that I've got these plugins plugged into PhotoLab as well. If I now type in lens, I'm not going to get any matching corrections, right? And I'm not going to get any lens matching corrections because I'm in the effects button. So I want to point that out so that you know that once you turn this off, now it can sort of rummage through and find any of those tools that you might need. It's a really handy feature. You just have to make sure that you're paying attention to if any of these particular buttons are actually on. A few other really fantastic updates or changes to the software. If you follow me into the far upper right-hand corner, this button, it looks like a little switch. When you click on it, this is going to show any of the tools that are currently applied to your image. Now, by default, depending upon what you decide when you install the software initially, but by default, DxO wants to make some adjustments to your images, right? By default, they're going to do some color rendering. In this case, there's some noise reduction. There will be noise reduction. Lens sharpness, according to the lens camera combination. So all of these things are actually automatically being adjusted on the image. But if we go into, let me turn off this switch. If we go into exposure compensation, and then I'll go into color, and let's just adjust the color with the white balance tool. And then increase vibrancy. Right now, when I move into this button to see what's active, all of those tools that I just changed are also active in here because I use them. I turn them on and I use them. Now, the other thing that's really interesting, or a new update to the software, aside from the active corrections in that upper right corner, are the favorite corrections. Now, I have kind of bypassed using this tool a little bit, and this is where DxO gives you options, right? You're able to create custom palettes, create custom workspaces, create custom presets and so on. And they also have now enabled us to favorite our favorite tools, right? So if I'm always using the exposure compensation, which is a very common tool, or HSL, or color rendering, or these other tools that I want to be able to find quickly and easily, but a different way to do it, I can favorite them by clicking on the little star that's to the right of each one of these different labels, right? So you've got the name of the thing, so focal length, and then the star. And then even better than that in my mind, which we have to finish the favorites, but every one of these different tools has a little a help section. I'll click back on that in a second because I want to talk a little bit about it. But anyways, any of the tools where we've clicked on that little star, now when I click on the favorite button, it is only going to show us the favorite corrections. So maybe you prefer to use this capability than using a custom workspace, right? Or maybe you figure out a way that you create your own custom workspace, but then you also use this favorites tool and capability. That's the beauty of what DxO is doing here. They're allowing us as the user to kind of formulate the best possible workflow for what we need and what we want. In doing that, we've got all of these really fancy, cool features, right? Like the star tool to be able to favorite this thing, or the active tool, or custom workspaces. So, moving on, active switch, we got that one. Let's move into, the history browser. Okay, so I've already made some adjustments on this image. we're going to switch photos in just a second, but I'm just going to move to the left side of the interface here, and we're going to scroll down because this is a new palette here within PhotoLab. And this thing here is the Advanced History browser, and it records every single thing that we do on our image as we do it, right? And so this is everything that we've done up to the custom white balance and then the default preset built in, right? And me clicking back in this history browser allows me to see the image at different states. So maybe I decide, it turns out I want to move back into where I had my red curve adjustment, which was actually a previous visit in the software. But basically, I'm able to step back in time and easily find these different parts of the process. And I'll show you this on another image, actually a couple more images. So let's click over into this photograph, right? And I've done some kind of egregious color and contrast adjustments on this particular photograph. And I did that so that we can kind of work our way back in this new history state panel. First things first, this is the current state that we're at, and it actually tells you the time and date that we made this adjustment. So I did this earlier today before the webinar just to kind of set it up and have it ready to go. But I can go and click back into these previous states. This history state browser is saved inside of PhotoLab, so if I close down the software and then I open it back up, it's still here, right? Now, if I move all the way back to, let's say, the applied default state. Now, you know what? Let's move forward a little bit. Let's go to Black's 100, right? And let's say we want to start over from this particular point. We like what we're seeing, but we want to make changes because it turns out we don't want the exposure adjustment or whatever is after this particular adjustment. What we can do is when we've clicked on this, I can move over into maybe my smart lighting, and I can turn this up or down, right? And what's going to happen, watch what happens to the tools or the history browser as I adjust this. I don't particularly like my adjustment that I'm making, but watch the left side as I let go of my cursor. Now I've changed my history state, right? And so basically what we're getting here is an ongoing state of our image as we move through the photo. So I'm going to move into my selective tone. Yeah, let's clean this up a little bit. I don't need all of these adjustments done. As I double click on all of these sliders, you're seeing my history state browser change, right? Now, another interesting operation or capability that's here within PhotoLab is using what's called a virtual copy. So let's say I actually did want to compare, this version of the image with another version of our photograph. Let's say it's an image where we're doing a whole bunch of retouching, or we are converting one image from color to black and white, or we just want different versions or iterations of the image. You can do that here within PhotoLab using what's called a virtual copy. And to access a virtual copy, you just move into your film strip down here in the bottom, right click, and then you say create virtual copy. Or on a Mac, you can hit Command D. Right? It's as simple as that. So when you do that, now we're going to have a second version of the same image. And this is a virtual copy, which means it's not going to take up any more, or at least it might take up a few kilobytes of space on your hard drive, but it's not going to take up as much space as this original raw file would. Not even close, because it's just metadata. And now we can go back and I can have two different versions of the image sitting right next to each other in our browser here, which is really quite nice in my mind to be able to do that. Because I'm not sure about you, I will oftentimes convert images from color to black and white, and I want to be able to see my original color version. Usually when I'm doing that, I'm going to use Silver Effects Pro to do the conversion, so I'm going to get a second copy anyways. But if I'm just doing all of the work within PhotoLab, I will end up having virtual copies in my browser as well. And so that's a nice way of working if you want multiple iterations of the same thing. Okay, so wow, it's 1:39 already. Time sure flies. We're talking about workflow, it's fun stuff. So here I've got an HDR exposure series, and I wanna show you a couple things with this grouping of images. First of all of these images have a funky naming convention. They have the original name that it was in camera, and then it also has a underscore copy, or a space and then copy. So we're going to rename the files, and then I also want to show you a more in-depth way of synchronizing corrections and adjustments. Because earlier in the webinar, I showed you if you highlight everything, like you highlight a group of images, you're able to make an adjustment, and whatever the adjustment is, if we've highlighted all of the images, it will kind of copy and paste it. It will be reflected in all of the photos. I want to show you another way of doing that that gives you some other kinds of abilities as well. Instead of just like an HDR exposure series, you could copy and paste or synchronize your adjustments across a whole bunch of different photos. Okay, first things first. I want to highlight all of these images. We're going to rename them. So they're all highlighted. We're going to right click and we're going to go to rename selected images, right? And in this case, I'm not going to add text. I'm actually going to use the replace text option. So it's a different version or a different way of adjusting this image, adjusting this naming. So what I want it to do is find the word space and then copy, because I want to get rid of the space that's in front of copy. And we're going to name this underscore and then Haleakala, because this is an HDR exposure series of Mount Haleakala in Hawaii. So I of course will forget how to spell this during our webinar. Haleakala. Not sure if that's right. I'm going to have to change this again because I've already forgotten how to spell Haleakala, and I don't have it in my notes. Okay, long story short, we've replaced space copy now with underscore Haleakala, right? So now I click rename, and easily and quickly we've renamed all of those files. So that's handy, and that's kind of what ends up happening to me in a lot of workflows. Is I have a group of images that I need to rename for whatever reason, or I might want to separate these images into a project. So being able to highlight these images, right click, and then have these kinds of capabilities at my fingertips, like revealing them in Finder for whatever reason, renaming them, and then adding to projects. This is an easy way of being able to kind of batch adjust whatever sort of thing I need to do. The next thing that we're going to do here is batch adjust these images. I'm just going to do it in a slightly different way than when we were working within the other grouping of photographs. So first thing that I want to do is adjust white balance on this image because the white balance is incorrect. So in this case, this is a sunrise in Mount Haleakala, and so the exposure range is gigantic between the fact that there's no light hitting the foreground and the sun is sort of peeking over those mountains and the clouds there. So because of that, the camera didn't capture the white balance very well in auto. Unfortunately, I didn't even have enough light or the ability to shoot a color checker or anything. So I'm going to kind of guess here, and I'm going to start out with my white balance presets, and I'm just going to kind of see what each one does. And I'm probably between cloudy and daylight in this case. This is relatively close. I'm going to go ahead and slide this over, make that a little bit warmer, and then I'm going to make my greens a little more green actually. And when I'm happy with my resulting white balance, let's take that way over. Nope, way too far. Maybe something like that. I want these greens to be the colors and tones that I remember them being when the sun actually rose, at least by my eye, maybe not by what was happening in camera. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with this white balance adjustment. I definitely want to make sure my color rendering is on as well. Because this is an HDR exposure series, I'm not going to do much of the other stuff on our exposures, but I do want all of these exposures within the exposure series to have the color rendering and the white balance adjustment that we just changed on it. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight all of the images, right? And then I'm going to right click on the image in the film strip here. And I'm going to say, oh, you know what? I actually jumped ahead. I need to be on just my photograph, just the one that I want to copy my settings from. I'm going to right click. And I'm going to go to copy correction settings or Shift Command C, right? So as I copy these corrections, it sort of copies them into a clipboard. So now I can highlight my other images, and you could do this with a whole folder. You could go and select maybe one or two other images. In this case, it's a whole, it's the exposure series, so I'm going to enable all of those images. and then right click and say paste correction settings. So as I do this, it's actually automatically going to paste all of the settings and adjustments that we made there. So there's another way of doing that as well, which I'm going to show you, because these are basically new capabilities. So that's a copy and paste. And what I want to be able to do is adjust multiple pictures really quickly as well. So that's copy and pasting them. And I want to be able to kind of adjust some stuff. So one more time here. I know we're running short on time. So I'm going to run into this group of photographs, because I've got some other adjustments that I want to make sure are reflected here. So I switched into the photo library. I'm sorry I did that quickly. It sort of maybe left people out because of that. And then I'm going to sort these by my single stars. And there's a couple ways to do that, but I'm just going to go ahead and click on my sort, and I'm going to turn off my 0 stars. And then what we're going to see in our grouping here are only the 1-star images that I've sort of separated out so that I can kind of tell the story of this experience, which I'd love to tell you all about, but we don't have enough time. So what I'm going to do here is actually group these and move them into a project. So I'm going to highlight all of them, hopefully, or hit Command A. That does the same thing. It highlights all of the images that are in the particular view that you have. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to go to create a project from current selection. So what this is going to do is it's going to add a new project on the left side. And what that technically does is it basically creates a separate bit of metadata that keeps these images together without having to actually move the file itself. And it's a hard thing for me to word, but watch what happens. If I right click and I go to create a new project, or create a project from current selection, I'm going to name this one Street Portraitist. And this is in Jaipur, India. So I'll just go create, and then watch the lower left corner here. As I click this, it will create, I'm going to hide this. It'll create a new project here for us. So this is another way of grouping images together very quickly and easily. And the reason why I want these 15 pictures in the group or in the project is because I'm going to use these to tell the story to my class, right? So I want to be able to separate these images out as if they're kind of like their own little portfolio. Okay, so the last thing that I want to show you before we get into these the questions here is a little bit more about copying and pasting adjustments, basically. So I'm just going to make some adjustments. Let's darken down the shadows just a touch and bring the midtones up. And I'm going to adjust our color, and let's increase the color vibrancy. And let's say we like that. Well, if we want to paste those across the board, we can do a number of different things, right? So we can do what we just did, that is copy correction settings and then paste them. Or we could paste selected corrections. We could paste localized adjustments. So if we used control points, or if we used gradients or anything, a brush or anything like that, you can actually separate out these different things to paste and copy them. So I want to copy these correction settings, and then I'm going to go ahead and just highlight the rest of these photos. I guess I can hit Command A. It's going to do the same thing. And then I'm going to say paste selected corrections. And what this does, so with the HDR exposure series, anything I did and I pasted, it pasted everything. So let me reword that. When I copied my adjustments with the Mountain HDR series, I just copied them and I pasted all of the things that I did over to my whole series of images. In this case, because I clicked paste selected corrections, so it's this specific tool, I'm able to actually choose which of the things that I want to copy and paste. So you've got two different, actually more than that, a bunch of different capabilities. And if there are like crops or viewpoint adjustments or things that I didn't want copied from one of these images to the other images, I can turn them all on or off here. So maybe I only want my color and my white balance adjustments, so I can unselect everything. And I'm just going to go ahead and click white balance and color accentuation, and what we also made a lightness adjustment as well in selective tone. So I'll turn that tool on, click paste, and now only those things that we adjusted in the first image are going to be reflected in the rest of these images. Okay. So Lori, I think I covered everything I needed to here. And I ran out of time. I wanted to tell more stories about these images, but of course that's what's going to happen because we've got so much to talk about with workflow.
Yes, you had a lot to talk about today. We do have a few questions. Dan, can you talk about virtual copies? There's a couple questions that we had. For instance, first question was, are the images that you created the project with virtual copies? Do you know?
No, they are not. So in the project here, these are the actual files, and so they kind of exist in two places at once. Now, hear me out. So the project, these are the original files. I've just separated them from the folder itself in here. Now, it's hard for me to word this because I didn't actually move the file. This file still sits, if I right click on it and I go to Reveal in Finder, this file still exists in the original folder, the Jaipur Street Photographer folder. It's just as a project, it's kind of like, it's an arrow. It's like pointing and saying all of these images belong in this project as well. In this case, all of the images were from the same folder, but oftentimes, like this group, this Nick collection, oh, I need to turn my filtering off. This collection, this is a group of images where they all come from different folders. And all I'm doing is am able to organize this group of images. So if someone wants to hear about the Nick Complete Collection walkthrough, so I walk them through all of the tools, I don't have to make an entirely new folder for that on my hard drive. I can just make a project and then drag images or bring them over into projects. Does that answer that?
Yes, that's great. Okay. One other question about virtual copies from Barbara. If you make and edit a virtual copy, what happens if the original is moved to another place? Do you lose the edited copy?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think that the virtual copy sits within PhotoLab, but I'm not entirely sure how it finds the original to do that. That's a good question. I haven't tried it. Add to that too, like, and this will be real quick. I'm sorry, Lori. Some people's workflows, you are moving files in folders around, but for the most part, I'm going to suggest that you keep your original raw files, in an archive, which is separate, but also in your working system. And you don't move the files around if you can help it, because that just creates other organizational issues. Now, that said, there's 200 people in this webinar right now who would say, oh, I do it for this reason, and that's fine. But for the most part, I'm going to recommend that you keep your raw files in your structured system, and you never move those original raw files out of that system. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Let's see here. A couple of questions here about advanced history.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in advanced history, is there a way to remove an adjustment that is not the last one and keep the most recent ones? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And there is a workaround, but there's no way to sort of remove, like I can't remove this green movement, right? So I made an adjustment to the green curve or channel mixer in this case. But as soon as I change this or move this around or whatever to that green adjustment or delete it, everything after that gets lost, right? The workaround, and that's because this is the history state browser is recording a state and then the history of that state. And if it could do, like if it could make adjustments and then retain all of these other things, that you'd have these like a whole tree of histories, you know, and at some point it's just going to be super overwhelming. So it wouldn't work very well. So there are kind of two workarounds. First of all, if let's say I don't like the channel mixer adjustment here, well, I could go back into my tools and I would say channel, right? Channel mixer, right there. And I can go and reduce it, right? Because I know what the adjustment is because it was there in the history state browser. So that's one workaround. The other workaround is actually to make a virtual copy. So I can create a virtual copy of the image, and then I could make a change to the virtual copy, but I leave the other one, right? But that's not really the workaround that you're asking for. It's just this way you could retain this history, and you could have a separate, you know, kind of workaround by having a virtual copy. Hopefully one of those, you know, one of those workarounds helps. But I think if you could do what I think you want the history browser to do, you'd end up with these trees with these, you know, arms that stick off of the history browser, and there you'd have to have a whole history map of the process. And I think, you know, A, I don't know if you can create that very easily in the software, and then B, it would be, you know, pretty overwhelming for a user because you're going to have 50 different like histories. If that makes sense.
Tony is asking, is there a way to display all of the keywords you have used across all of your photos in file folders?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know. I don't use keywords myself, which probably sounds crazy, but because I don't use keywords, I don't want to speak to it specifically. There are keyword capabilities here in PhotoLab, and as far as I know, they work pretty well, but I actually don't know the answer to that one because I don't use them. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Under the detail tool, Tony said that he wanted to know how he could add the unsharp mask feature. He accidentally deleted it from the menu.
Ah, good call. So we're in the detail section, and you've deleted a tool. So let's just go right into unsharp mask. So you know what? I think I've forgotten how to even get rid of one of these. Collapse all. You can definitely delete it. I don't know if it's going to let me right here. Let's go to the advanced module where I can actually access this. So we're in detail, and you accidentally deleted that. Okay, so you've dragged it out and it deletes it. Oops. The way you can add it back in is you go into the detail palette, click on the like settings tool here, and then you can add this back in. So anything that has a checkbox next to it is what's currently included in that detail or in that particular palette. So I want to add unsharp mask back into it, which is unchecked right now. I can go and click and add that back in. And then if you like it in a different order, Tony, you can actually click on that and drag it around as well.
Okay, last question here. Philippe is asking, is it possible to prevent the auto adjustment when opening a new picture?
Yes. There's a couple ways to do that. I haven't tried to do this in preferences, but I'm going to assume that it's in preferences. So let's actually go into this, and I'm going into it blind. But I'm pretty sure that in the general, maybe it's in advanced presets. Default presets for raw images. Yeah, so I missed the name, I'm sorry, Lori, but whoever it was, if they wanted to open up DxO, have their images in here, but they don't want the sort of standard adjustments, they can go into the general section of preferences, click on the drop-down menu, and then either maybe choose DxO optical corrections only, right? And that's only going to apply the corrections between the camera and the lens, or they could add no correction or any of these presets. But yeah, that's how you'd go about that. Sort of overall for your entire workflow, you just set it right in there. Another way to do that is if you had a grouping of images, you could just go into your presets, preset editor. You could choose a grouping of images, and then you could just tell it to use the default, like the standard or the no correction or whichever of the presets you wanted. If that makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this presentation. Dan, thank you for your great tutelage. I'm going to let you go ahead and close out this webinar.
Cool, absolutely, thank you. Yeah, we've got, well, no time now. We just ran out of time, but this was a fun one. I love talking about workflow. I love talking about the Nick plugins, DxO, PhotoLab, post-processing, ideation, concepts, all of that stuff. I wish I got to reach out to you guys more often with these kinds of things, but I do appreciate your time. Hopefully you found these to be helpful, and have an absolutely fantastic day, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks again.